In this video today, we're going to talk about perfect square trinomials. Oops, perfect square trinomial. Sorry, it was not on the page. And to get a perfect square trinomial, we would square a binomial. So if you had something like 2x minus 5 and you were to square it, that means you want to multiply it by itself. 2x minus 5 times 2x minus 5. And then to square it, we would need to FOIL. So we'd have 2x times 2x gives us 4x squared. The outside, negative 10x. Inside, negative 10x. And last, what's negative 5 times negative 5? Good, positive 25. And notice that last term, when we square a binomial, will always be positive. So a common mistake, let's just simplify this, because can anything simplify here? What? Yeah, so you get negative 20x, right? Plus 25. So a common mistake when people square a binomial is they will just go, oh, I can square the 2x and get 4x squared, and I can square the 5 and get 25. But that's not actually correct. As we've just shown, we have to FOIL, and so we will get this middle term here. Okay, and that was a mistake I saw on some of your papers, so you'll want to be really aware that whenever you see that binomial squared, you're going to get a perfect square trinomial. And that's because what is a perfect square? Well, the definition of a perfect square is a number times itself, x squared. So the perfect squares we were dealing with when we were looking at difference of two squares were 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 36, 49. What comes next? 64, 81, 100, 121, 144 is 12 squared. And then I just like to show off that I know these. You can memorize them if you want to. 196 is 14 squared, 225 is 15 squared, 256 is 16 squared. Okay, but you probably won't see these bigger ones. We usually just memorize up to 12 squared. So when you're factoring and you see a trinomial and it starts with a perfect square and it ends with a perfect square, and by the way, this will always have to be positive because you had to have a number times itself, you could start by thinking, well, I know 2x times 2x gives me 4x squared. 5 times 5 gives me 25. Now let's say I have a negative 20x as my middle term. I know that both the signs would have to be negative. And this is the same thing as writing it as 2x minus 5 squared. Okay, so let's try another one. If I see, let's say, 81x squared at the beginning, and at the end I see 64. And remember, again, this has to be positive here. I don't know what the middle term is yet, but let's say I know it's a trinomial. So I have 9x times 9x would give me the 81x squared. 64 would be 8 times 8. And then what would the middle term have to be in order for this to factor this way? It could actually be a negative. And that would mean that both of these signs would be negative. But what number would go in the middle? Well, that would be our outside and our inside. So 9 times 8 is, or negative 8, 9x times negative 8 is negative 72x. And the middle, we get another negative 72x. And so that would be a negative 144x, right? And that's a coincidence, by the way, that that's a perfect square as well. Does not have to be a perfect square in the middle. Just so happens that the numbers I chose gave that. Okay, let's look at another example. So I'm going to say that the trinomial starts with, give me a perfect square that you want it to start with. Any perfect square. What? 16. 16x squared. Okay, give me another perfect square for the last term. And remember, it has to be positive. 9. Great. Okay, so how, without We know it's a trinomial, so there's something going on in the middle. We'll make this positive. What would be the factors just based on those two numbers? 4x plus 3, 4x plus 3. So to complete the perfect square trinomial, what would the middle term have to be for the outside and inside to work? Yes, 24x. You see that wasn't a perfect square. Let's try one more before we end the video. Any questions so far on this perfect square trinomial thing? Okay, and some people were asking, could you write this as 4x plus 3 squared? Is that equivalent? Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, in a way, it's more simplified, isn't it? Because it's just shorter. It's smaller. It's more simple. Okay, give me another perfect square. 25x squared. Okay, and what about the last? Another perfect square. 81. Okay, remember, what sign does this have to be in order for this to work? Positive. If it's a negative, then it was probably a difference of two squares and there was no middle term. But there is a middle term. We're going to make it a negative. Okay, what are the factors so far? 5x minus 9, 5x minus 9. Now, what would the middle term be? 90. And how'd you get 90? Yeah, you have a negative 45 for the outside, another negative 45, so this gives you a 90x in the middle, which makes this a 1, 2, 3 trinomial. Any questions about this before we end the video?